Hey everybody, it's the Knitting Professor, and today I would like to consider the question of the extent to which knitting should be considered women's art. And I have a few reference works here to take a peek at. Wrote myself some notes. So this question is dear to my heart for a number of reasons. One of the main ones being the novels that I'm writing, which are inclusive. In fact, in the first volume, I have cis male knitter just descending on this group of women who are in their own fiber guild and just sort of letting the fur fly. So it's really fun to write about. But I think it's a really serious question that people are actually taking a look at today, because I think the definitive answer to the question, is knitting women's art, is no. And to the extent that the answer is yes, or what the Germans might consider jein, which is yes and no. I think our bird clock is breaking over there. Why, it has to do with cultural history in the Western world. So I've been doing a little reading, and I'm probably going to revisit this topic multiple times because it's so complex. And what I really would like to engender here is a kind of a conversation. So I would love to get your input, particularly with regard to maybe references that I should be looking at, histories, unique cultures where the traditions were distinctive. So just to raise a couple of issues. So apparently it was in the Renaissance when this notion that there was a male sphere of high art, when that developed. So we're talking 600, 700, 800 years ago. And the art that was sort of regarded as the men's domain was painting and sculpture. And if you think about it, you go to a museum, and obviously the paintings and sculptures that women made are probably going to be in the minority, unless there is, an exhibit that is specifically devoted to Georgia O'Keeffe or whoever it is. So by contrast, you have the fiber arts, which were strongly correlated with domestic type of activities. I suppose the exception to that would be the Gobelin tapestries, and where the kings and queens and castles of Europe, they all had to have these huge, very complex, very expensive tapestries that were made in the Flemish areas of what is now Belgium, as well as in France. But here's some other things that are sort of associated with male art versus female art, to the extent that we can claim that there is such a division. Male art tends to revolve around the idea of genius, the idea that, a single individual can scale the precipitous heights of artistic accomplishment in a way that a woman could never do that. On the other hand, women's art tends to be more related to the idea of the collective, and especially, again, to the sphere of the home. Another thing that is associated with men's art, has been over the centuries, is money, especially in the past couple of centuries with the rise of capitalism. The idea that a painting by Van Gogh could, for example, be so valuable as to secure bids in the millions of dollars just for a single work of art that probably, took him a couple of years. Whereas an equivalent work by a female artist, maybe, let's say, a tapestry by the Scandinavian, I'm trying to recall her name, the tapestry maker from Sweden. I actually did a video on her fairly recently. It'll come to me. That, who knows if those are even worth a few $100,000. I don't know. But in any case, when you think about art auctions, paintings and sculptures can secure a lot of, huge sums of money. Whereas if you're thinking in terms of tapestries or that kind of thing, I'm not sure that would be the case, especially if they're more like, the kind of fiber art that you might see. Like an example would be, I was in the airport in Minneapolis, and I saw a right to vote set of quilted tapestries that were arranged in a series, and I'm sure that the artist was paid good money to produce those, but probably not in the millions of dollars. Another thing that is sort of ascribed to knitting and women's art in general is that it's not professional. It's more of a craft. It's not really an art. It's a craft. It's something that sort of is passed on from mother to child and unpaid. And the level of significance that is accorded it is low. I suppose you can argue that some works of fiber are fragile, so they would not necessarily have survived the sands of time in a way that, say, a sculpture would, although that's arguable too, right? I've seen plenty of sculptures where they were from Greece or Rome and the noses were broken off or the hands were broken off or whatever. So the idea of permanence attaches to male forms of art in a way that it does not to female forms of art. But I think this opens up a kind of an opportunity because the fiber arts lend themselves very well to the notion of resistance and rebellion, partly because of their minority status. You know, I think there's more of a open door there for, well, we can, you know, try to override this low status that we've been accorded. Some other elements that are attributed to the female arts, the fiber arts, in particular knitting, crocheting, spinning, that kind of thing, is female bonding. So I think about the pink cat hats that were worn 7 or 8 years ago in response to the election outcome. I'm trying to remember what they were called. You all can help me with that. I appreciate any help that you can give me. But people were knitting pink knitted hats with ears to suggest a form of collective resistance to the predominant government and the attitudes that went along with it. Another thing is kind of cool about knitting and women's art, fiber art in particular, is that it's not elitist. I think it's easy to claim that painting and sculpture, especially as they are sort of exhibited in museums and this kind of thing, it's very elitist. You know, it's not necessarily for everyone. Difficult to interpret, a lot of theory surrounding the meaning, the way, you know, the cultural messages that are inherent in these works of art. There's definitely an elitist element to it. And, you know, it can be very rewarding to try to go down those avenues of interpretation and figure out what is the, you know, the message behind works of art by this or that, you know, great respected artist. But the non-elitist side of the fiber arts, I think, is kind of a real plus because anyone can have access to it. Anyone, doesn't have to be male or female, right, can enjoy the benefits of undertaking those crafts and enjoying the outcome and wearing the art, etc. There's definitely a link, I think, between women and fiber art. And one of those links has to do with domesticity. And domesticity leads us to the idea of care. So one of the concepts that I read about was the fact that as children learn knitting from a grandmother or wear the clothes that their mother sewed for them or sleep under the quilt that their grandmother quilted for them, they feel cared for, they feel loved. It's like a concrete expression of familial care and empathy, which I think is extremely important. So that's one element of knitting. I think we could claim that it's related to the traditional women's role, you know, of the caregiver and this kind of thing. But one thing that on the other side of the coin I have written down here as a question is how many of us could name great female needleworkers, right? We can name great painters. We can name, I don't know, Delacroix, Picasso, Salvador Dali, but and we can probably even name a few great female painters like Mary Cassatt. They're like the exception that proves the rule. But what about great female needleworkers, you know? So that's a little bit maybe Betsy Ross, right? I don't know. But I thought I would just sort of point out, and these are just things that I kind of want to pursue over time, again, partly because they're themes in my novels, because I have many strong women in my novels who are fiber crafters and who are exploring this whole issue. In fact, in the first book, I have I did a lot of research on the role played by knitting and spinning among enslaved women in the United States. And one of the things that I ran across was this very famous picture of Sojourner Truth, where she is knitting and she's wearing a shawl, and her role as a leader in the abolitionist movement, she was very inspirational. And I have not read this chapter yet about politics in the textile arts, but after I do, I'll probably come back with some more comments and invite more input from you. And another thing that I ran across was I have inherited some books like this. So this book is about American needlework. And of course, it's the Women's Day book of American needlework. So we immediately have the connection being made between needlework and women based on the Women's Day magazine. Now, here's the irony, is that this book came to me from my brother's book collection. So my brother was a tailor, but he also was a knitter and a crocheter. In fact, apart from sewing, the main fiber craft that he did, and I should actually try to do a podcast on that, he was a tatter. He could tat, and as we all know, tatting is a very complicated lace work type of art. I have inherited the implements that he used for that, and I'm very proud of the fact that, hey Budapest, that he, could do that, and that he could sort of be a participant in a tradition of a rather complex form of needlework that not everybody can do. That's arguably an art that's dying. But another thing that I ran across in this book, and as I read this book, I'll probably come back over the months with some more comments. But I ran across in the politics chapter, AIDS Memorial Quilt conceived by Cleve Jones. And I thought I would end on this note because my brother participated in the Names Project. And the Names Project is a really great example, I think, of a link between, or maybe the link between the fiber arts and care. Because here you had people from all over the country making quilts in the political name, we're going to call it the political name of identifying and sort of securing or grabbing empathy for the people who succumbed to AIDS during the 80s. And my brother saw that happen to people who were very close to him. He was gay, and our whole family was sort of in awe of the fact that it didn't hit him, but it hit his friends. And my mother was also engaged in rooting for my brother as a participant in the Names Project. He did sew some of the quilts, and my mom went and saw them on display, and it meant a great deal to her as the mother of a gay son. And we have this book, The Quilt Stories from the Names Project. And I think just sort of ending on this note of the political power of so-called women's art is probably a good ending point for today. Again, with the request, I would love your comments, your leads on reference works that I should consult as I sort of pick away at this topic in my novels. I have a art professor who she's like a running thread throughout all of the novels in my series. So this gives you an example of fiber art as a way, of putting names on people who were victims of a complex historical watershed event that linked, all kinds of attitudes, toward marginalization, exclusion, lack of empathy, all that stuff that arguably is playing a role today in the political landscape across the world. Here's a picture. This is not my brother, but I could easily picture my brother in this position of working on a quilt square. And here's some more pictures of quilt squares with the individual names. Again, just putting names to the suffering was a way of personalizing it and drawing people in and helping them to acknowledge the human suffering and engage their empathy. And have a couple of photos in this book as well of the collective. So fiber art as a collective expression. So here we go. The quilt in Washington being laid out with thousands of people in attendance, recognizing, acknowledging the suffering that occurred during that whole period. So I think in exploring the question of the extent to which fiber art is, quote unquote, women's art, it opens the door to a lot of valuable conversations about the cultural significance of the fiber arts, our role. I've seen posts lately on Instagram and TikTok that say just by knitting, we're resisting. And I like that. And there's so many ways in which that's true. In fact, that might be a great question for the next podcast. Maybe you would have some ideas, but I can think of some ways that in which that is true, that knitting and crocheting and quilting and sewing and all those things, all those fiber arts do in fact constitute concrete things that we can do now to enhance the role of empathy, to improve the quality of life, and to turn conversations in directions that actually make human existence just a little bit better. I'll just put it that way. So I look forward to your comments. I look forward to your thoughts, your references, your ideas, because this is a strand that I would like to look at again. And I would be really interested in having your guidance on how I can go about doing that in a way that lifts all of us up. So on that note, I will say so long and see you soon. Bye.